want to be discursive, but who were the financiers before in conservative Inc? Who were the big financiers behind the scenes? Sort of behind the scenes. Well, the Koch brothers. Oddly enough, I think Koch is also a German surname. Thiel and Koch, aren't they German surnames? Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure they're cryptos or something, right? But the Koch brothers, and they were the main financiers for maybe almost 50 years. Okay. So if you're 50, 60, 70 years of age or younger, the anti-white conservative Koch brothers were the economic engine behind the resistance to anti-whiteism. Imagine that. Your whole life. So for generations, it's been these generation after generation, this generation, the next one, it's been the Koch brothers. And they're being displaced. I think one is dead, right? They're being displaced. And really, Peter Thiel is now the kingmaker. And of course, there are other players as well. I mean, you have, for example, Jared Kushner is back in the scene, and he's going to be hiring again, just like in 2016. So it's not the Heritage Foundation. It's not Project 25. It is Jared Kushner again. Aren't we lucky? Another clearly Israel first kind of guy, which makes him anti-white. So I don't like him because he's anti-white, not because he had a Jewish mother or father or both, or I really don't care. What I care about is whether or not he's anti-white or white positive or neutral, whatever. But he's going to be back. Can you imagine? 2016 all over again. Going to populate the Trump administration with a bunch of these Israel firsters and anti-white cuck servidom and etc. So you got Jared, you have others. You have multi-billionaire Jews who are sort of maybe not necessarily backing Trump and MAGA, but they run parallel and sort of create a wind that buoys and pushes MAGA or conservative MAGA, if you will, versus, again, original MAGA. And that would be people like Bill Ackman, right, at Columbia. And he suddenly flipped when his fellow Jews at Columbia, his alma mater, were being mistreated. They were being spoken negatively about, right, after October 7th, not this one, the previous. You have, so Bill, multi-billionaire. People rarely talk about what is that other multi-billion. He's also a player there, sort of the exact same way. Suica, Henry Suica. And so how many in the we can even get around to Henry Suica, another multi-billionaire who is just like Ackman. He has, I think he was a Columbia grad as well. And now he's sort of running parallel to MAGA. He's like, no more money, no more support, no more. And I don't know. I haven't investigated. You'll have to talk to the anti-people about whether or not he is directly financing anything that's pro-MAGA or conservative MAGA. Who else? Well, you have the multi-billionaire. And remember, this is not my fort. This is not my fort. And yes, that's the proper pronunciation. Look it up. It's your fort, not your forte. This is not my fort. It's not my wheelhouse. But Miriam Adelson, right? I read about her and her super PAC, $100 million, I think she put into Preserve America. Is that what it's called? Preserve America? And then you have the multi-billionaire Ike Perlmutter and his Trump super PAC. And I don't know exactly how much they've raised. I think he started it off with $50 million. And he's from Marvel and a bunch of other things. What is his super PAC called? Right for America, I think is what it's called. Right for America. So you've got them. And how many more? How many more? You have, well, let's do this. This one I know the Fuentesians will really appreciate. So if they show up, they'll really appreciate this. You have this constellation of, well, and people who are white and like, of course, Peter Thiel and others. And there are some blacks in there. All of these people we would just call anti-white. And there is like an ideology, we'll just leave it at like an ideology, a philosophy that sort of underpins and undergirds all the things that they are doing and saying. They're like leading lights in the articulation of the philosophy, of the ideology that undergirds all of these aforementioned and so many more that there's just no time. We're going to get into this. We're going to get into this stellar debate in just a moment. And maybe somebody like Curtis Yarvin really represents. So this contemporary of ours, Curtis Yarvin, popular. He's also, wouldn't you know it, he's also but he doesn't exist in a void, does he? You have, along with Curtis Yarvin, you have a little bit earlier and kind of an influencer, Bill Kristol. And of course, along with him, Irving, his father, also influencer. And he, of course, didn't exist, Irving, in a void. He was heavily influenced by Harvey Mansfield, another. Can you believe it? The Kristols are Mansfield too. Shocker. Both Mansfield and Irving Kristol, they were both influenced by Leo Strauss, who was a prolific writer, happens to be as well. He didn't exist in a void, though, either. He's connected to Zeev Jabotinsky. And a great many people, including Zeev Jabotinsky, happens to be as well, influenced by Baruch Spinoza. And Spinoza influenced by the preeminent of all philosophers, Maimonides. And Maimonides influenced by the Kalam. And what's Kalam, you ask? Well, you've been in the anti-Jewish movement for a long time. Kalam. Well, that's a reactionary ideology to Aristotelianism. And so who were they influenced by? Well, we could just go on. Maybe you'll say Satan. I don't know. But I know your current arguments. I know the arguments from the past. I've been here for decades. We have people like Fuentes today, who is in this debate, who has essentially told his entourage, his Fintuesians, he's essentially told them that he is the person who is, he is the Jewish question. And I have a little respect for the impudence there, the gall of it, but no respect for the followers who actually heed these things. We have Witzke the other day, who said a witless Witzke ism, which was she and all her followers have to thank Fuentes for bringing the Jewish question in quotes, of course, to the world, and for telling the world and for revealing all of these facts. And I'm like, what? Were you born yesterday? What are you even talking? And then, even more recently, just a couple of days ago, Lily Gaddis, who we had on this show, and we appeared with her on her show, she tweets the other day, boy, if white people could watch each other's backs, like watch each other's backs, we'd have it made, something in that effect, which is, of course, what we argue, that we need to be white or Westman-centric rather than Judeo-centric, either in worship, Judeo-centric, either in worship of, like so many Christians out there, or hatred of. We need to be white and Westman-centric, focused on it. That's our argument. We shared that at length in a fantastic, the best interview she's ever had, Lily Gaddis. She tweets it. And then some Fuentesian shows up and says, I know somebody's been listening to Nick Fuentes. And I'm like, what? What are you even talking about? A member of our community ends up saying, what are you even saying? The only person who argues this is No White Guilt Jason Kuna. And he's the only person I've ever heard, in every single week he's making this argument. Fuentes never. And you're giving this credit to Fuentes. And you have to imagine that that's a bit galling, that I've had decades of upwind against the anti-whites, but even more so against the anti, who have usurped the representation, just like the conservatives right now through Peter Thiel usurped the leadership of our resistance against our victimizers. And they attack. If you're not doing what they demand, then you're a cult. If you're not talking the way they demand you talk, then you're a cult. If you're not focused on the hating on Jews 24/7, then you're a cult, and you're a cult leader. And I mean, it just goes on and on. These people, the Fuentesians, and I'm saying, we'll get to this right now. I'm not going to be desultory anymore. We'll get to it right now. But these people think that the world began with Nick Fuentes. Does anybody remember who was the preeminent anti before Nick Fuentes? Well, most people should probably remember that that was Richard Spencer. But how many of you have been around long enough to remember the preeminent anti before Richard Spencer? Anybody? Matt Hale was before Richard Spencer. And who was the preeminent anti before Matt Hale? It was Alex Linder. And who before Alex Linder, and to a degree there's some crossover as contemporaries. I'm just pulling this out of the air, so I can't, put it in perfect order for you. Well, before Linder, you had David Duke and Don Black. And before that, Dr. Pierce. And before that, Tom Metzger. And before that, Kevin Alfred Strom. And before that, Sam Dixon. And before that, Ben Klassen. And before that, Frank Weltner. And before that, you had the preachers. You had Pastor Butler and Pastor Wickstrom. And before that, you had David Lane. And before that, you had Rockwell. And before that, you had William Gailey Simpson. And before that, you had Wilmot Robertson. And before Wilmot Robertson, Instauration. Do you remember? Does anybody even know of these things anymore? Dispossessed Majority? Anyone? Before that, you had Revelo P. Oliver. I mean, how many people is that? That's like 20 plus people going back in time. All of them anti, all of them speaking as, the least among them, of course, is Sam. He actually cares about white people. But the rest, anti, not concerned about white people, just anti. They say they care about white people, but really it's just about being anti. And here you have this community that thinks the world began with Nick Fuentes. Just seriously? It began with Fuentes. I didn't even mention just now clowns like Patrick Little, or how about the Heimbach maneuver himself, Matt Heimbach. How about those people? How about contemporary legitimate researchers like McDonald and Green? How about organization leaders like Mark Collett, Baylog, Warren Baylog, Joey Jordan, Mike Penovich? I didn't even mention organizations like Patriotic Front. How many more? How many more? It just goes on and on. So here we have to say, I could go on forever. I've been in this for decades. I know all of your arguments about how it's all the Jews and they are, and I know I've seen it all. I've looked at it all. And the bottom line is all of that has failed. First of all, it's just not fundamentally not true. The vast majority of these people would say, well, it's not every single one when you pin them down. So fundamentally, it's not true. But second, we do not move one jot closer to our well-being by being Judeo-centric, either worshiping them or hating them. That's just my opinion. So let's just do this. Fuentesians, branch Fuentesians. Let's do this. We'll make a deal. And all of the other anti-Jews out there, you stay in your lane. You stay in your lane. As far as I'm concerned, you can talk about anti-white, so people who are anti-white, all you want. And we over here, we're going to work with a dialogic that has proven wildly successful for white people, individuals, familial, communal, and we will focus on white and Westman, white well-being. We will be white, Westman-centric, and you all can be Judeo-centric. Don't come over here and say that we're illegitimate as advocates for white people because we're not Judeo-centric. You can go ahead and focus on them all you want. You want to focus on them if they're anti-white, more power to you. You want to hate on them because an individual is born, get a therapist.